Okay, council, we'll go ahead and get started. Jerry's on his way, should be here momentarily. Just wanted to do a couple quick agenda adjustments on our council university. We're scheduled for final protocols and standards, finalized protocols and standards of conduct. That's completed.
Correct.
Then where we've got the council board and commission liaison appointments, that's also, what am I doing? I'm looking at the wrong thing. I'm sorry. Week 4. The 2012 City Council breakfast schedule, we're going to move that to the end of discussion today if we have time. If not, we'll move it over to 110. So instead of going first on the agenda, it will go last. The paperless council packets, that will be a discussion for January 10th as opposed to this evening. We're not quite ready on that. The first thing on the agenda will be the review of council amended legislative rules, which was up on December 13th. Week 3 was the second item. That will be our first item because we have the amended ones in our packet, and we'll take a quick look at those. Then the second thing we'll talk about this evening is the draft 2012-2013 goals and objectives, and we'll try to get through those completely this evening, allowing that we do need to take a quick dinner break, and we do need to be ready for our regular meeting at 7 p.m. So that's why I've actually moved the breakfast schedule to the end, because if we need to bump that, we can go to next week. Any questions? Is everybody okay with that?
I'm not even sure I'm looking at the right version of the agenda.
Page 2 on the agenda, we got emailed, Michael emailed it to us yesterday, or I think it was yesterday.
Yeah, but I printed out and put it with different things. But I'll follow along.
Oh, I think you've got it right there.
Is this the one?
Mine had coffee spilled on it.
Okay, so we're moving to the say again.
Oh, here.
Just thanks.
Okay, so our number 1 item will be review of council amended legislative rules. Our number 2 item will be draft 2012-2013 goals and objectives. The breakfast schedule moves to the end of the meeting if we have time, and council packets moves to 110. Okay, so, hey, Jerry.
Hi, how are
Hi.
you? The music stopped playing with you over here. Oh, man. Or just move here.
You can sit wherever you like.
Is this because Bruce beat me here?
I wanted you sitting closer. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Jerry, we just made a few tweaks on the agenda. We're actually going to, the council breakfast schedule, we're going to take that to the end if we have time. If not, we'll go to move that to next week. And the paperless packets, we're going to move that to next week.
Okay.
So we'll start with the amended legislative rules. Has everybody had a chance to take a look at those? Does anybody have any?
Well, Jerry's sorting himself out. Let me ask a question. Did we formally approve the appointments to boards and the liaisons and so forth? I thought we just did that.
You have not
informally.
formally taken any action
Right, that's
on
what
any
I
of
thought.
these.
So
Yeah, it'll be January 17th that we have all of that on for formal action.
But we should start going to our new appointments, assuming they're going to get
Yeah, yes,
officially approved. Okay.
yes.
Thank you.
And if you're replacing an existing liaison and you'd like to have them come with you in the beginning and introduce and then leave, that's perfectly acceptable. Or you can just go solo. Jim?
I was going to suggest when you start going through the proposals that you either go through page by page or Roman numeral by Roman numeral so we don't jump all over the place.
Yes, that's what we'll do. So we'll start. Is everybody ready? Proposed legislative rules, Roman numeral 1. Any questions, comments?
Let me say something about the whole thing.
I can't hear you.
Jesus, right in front of my face here. Sorry. Now can you hear me? Holy dang. I can't get my papers close enough to hear. I know we decided we'd use multiple words like councils, boards, commissions, but at some places we did certain things and some we did others, and I suggest that we use council and mayor pro tem, and then just have a note that would govern the whole thing that says how that translates. So that stands for boards and commissions, and that mayor equals the chair or whatever of the BCs. So it just, anyway, that's my suggestion.
I like that idea, so I'd be in favor of that. It's easier to read it, I think.
Yeah. And there might be a couple places that need a little tweaking that you would see then, where we wouldn't say, or other presiding officer, whatever. It's just,
Right.
so I suggest that we would authorize our acting city attorney to make that kind of change, if you all would.
Any objections? Okay. Okay, so on Roman numeral 1, we did have the one edit there, council, boards, and commissions. Any other concerns? Roman numeral 2. Okay, I had one question on 2. On the order of the agenda, that is something that when we vote on this on the 17th, and after that, it will change, because this is different than what we currently use.
Unless you guys are comfortable with this and you want us to start it for next week. I guess it'd be the 7th.
17th.
17th would be the first, and that's where we'd vote on it. We might as well just vote on it all and then start the change. Okay. Yeah, I'm fine with that. Everybody okay with that?
So we'd start at first meeting in February.
Okay.
So we're going to do council reports at the beginning of the meeting.
Yeah, in February. Okay,
And
anything?
excuse me, so it'd be all the reports, like staff reports too, right? Yeah.
Okay, Roman numeral 3. 4.
I just want to have a concern about Roman numeral 4B, about debate. I think we need to use some reasonableness in this, that if there's a whole queue of people wanting to talk about a subject, and the second or third speaker asks the first speaker to clarify something, they ought to have that ability to speak then, as opposed to having to wait to the very end of that queue to bring it back up and speak again. So I know why this is here, and I know it's in Robert's Rules the same way, but it bothers me that we can't have a dialogue back and forth when there's only 7 of us, or maybe a staff member or 2 having the discussion.
Just as a question, Jim, so how would you know necessarily that that's what somebody wanted to do before you called on them?
If you're talking about a specific subject and these 3, 4 guys are in line behind you to speak about the same subject, but the second person asks you to clarify what your comments were, you ought to be able to do that at that time, to clarify those comments, as opposed to waiting until all the rest of everybody else speaks. But
Okay.
then you have to clarify it, because by that time, the entire
No, that's
tone of
okay.
the discussion can go someplace else.
Yeah, I was thinking you were meaning even just immediately asking to clarify, but no, that's okay.
Bill?
On this one, possibly inserting the word regular as a guiding principle in the preamble comments before you get to A, so that it's the regular meetings that govern this. I mean, we just had an exchange that was an informal example that in a special meeting or a study session, you want to have the discussion that can go back and forth. And so if we just inserted regular meetings in the preamble, I think that addresses Jim's question for the most part.
So it'd be regular and special? Right.
I would have just said regular meetings and leave it at that.
Is everybody okay with putting regular in? Okay.
I'm okay with that, but then I'd like you to ask separate on special, because special is just a regular meeting at a different date. It's a formal meeting.
Show of hands, those who want to insert special. 3. Loses. Okay. And then Jim, also on your, I get what you're saying, because it is almost a matter of kind of running the meeting well, too, is that if you do have a query of another council member, that council member does need to keep that, not go into their debate, not go into their speech of sorts, but to just answer that question so that you can go back to what you were saying, and then we continue to move through the queue. So, okay.
I just think you need to reuse some common sense
Discussion.
judgment.
Absolutely.
With that statement.
Okay. Anything else in 4?
I do.
Okay.
I'm on page 5, in item number Q. The sentence there begins, thereupon, shall vote on whether to stop debate and proceed with the vote on the main motion. That's true if the vote is yes to stop debate. Then you vote on the main motion. But if the vote is no to stop the debate, then discussion can continue. And I don't know if we need to clarify, any more clarifying in that or not.
Yeah, well, I was actually going to raise this issue because we've got call the question in I,
Right?
and we have it again in
Yes.
Q. So I was going to take Q out because I is more specific to what we discussed last time, and that is that you wanted it to be a 2/3 vote. So I think we should take all of I out, or I'm sorry, all of Q out.
All right.
Okay, is everybody okay with that? Okay.
And then on S, this is on page 6, very top, reconsideration. To me, there's a conflict. It says 10 days versus the next regular meeting, which is in the next sentence after that. And those are not compatible in my mind.
The one needs to be taken out. We added the one thing to take care of the other. And so the first one, let's see, is the one that sentence would be taken out, and the next one then takes care of that.
Taking the 10 days out.
Yeah.
That's what I
just
think,
take
too.
that whole sentence out, and then I think the next sentence just covers it.
Now, if you'll look up at the board, we're taking out all of this.
Yeah.
Okay.
But hold it for a second till they see.
I can back up.
They both are dealing with reconsider, and I had proposed that we do that second piece, but when Marlene did it, she typed in the whole thing rather than just,
Oh, replacing.
part.
Got it.
I mean, as not faulting her, we sure have fun.
Well, the first part of that sentence is not repeated in the second sentence, though. A motion to reconsider a proposal that has been acted upon must be made prior to adjournment of the meeting at which the vote was taken. Or we,
Well, if we want to keep that wording in, that's the intent, so.
but if it goes away, I don't see where it is repeated anywhere
Well, what is
else.
it we be reconsidering? It's,
It should say a motion to reconsider a proposal that has been acted upon must be made prior to adjournment of the meeting or at the next, or no later than the next regular meeting. That's what it's supposed to say.
okay.
Then we would take out all of,
Wait a minute.
Yes. Up to a majority vote.
up to a majority.
Yes.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Wait a minute.
Here, let me make the section a little bit bigger so everyone can see it a little bit easier.
No, it's the, okay, wait a minute, just a second.
Yeah, that works.
Yeah,
Yep,
yeah,
that's right.
that's it. Thank you.
Okay. Everybody okay?
And I need to back up to page 4.
Jim, did you have anything else?
I do, but if we want to back up, mine's on page 7.
On page 4I, is just tidying up a sentence. This motion is made to end discussion that has become lengthy or repetitious. When, then insert, the motion is seconded. We need to know what's seconded. When the motion is seconded, etc. The mayor's not being seconded, the motion is.
Is everybody okay with that?
And in the paragraph after that, we need to insert the word "the." Motion to reconsider, council may reconsider a vote during the same meeting on the motion, That's all.
Everybody okay? Okay. Jim?
On top of page 7, under legislative versus quasi-judicial hearings, somewhere I'd like to see something about when it is permissible for city council to watch the planning commission on TV. Because it bothers me that it's on TV, and yet some of those things that goes to the planning commission comes to us. If we've seen that on TV, we're already biased one way or the other, and I think that we should all be prevented from watching the planning commission on TV for any reason.
I have a question. So when we get something that comes before us, we get the minutes of the meeting where they discussed it, but you're thinking there's a little more
But that's
objectivity that way?
I think that if you've watched the proceedings on television, you've heard the arguments pro and con, and you've already begun to develop a position on what one side or the other. And I think that should be not allowed. And so I would like to see a prohibition about council watching planning commission on television at all.
So, and you want that in the legislative procedures as opposed to protocol?
Well, it has to do with when it's a quasi-judicial proceeding that's going to come to us as a possibility. So, but I just...
You're less concerned about where it is? but
I'm
having it in there.
I'm not really concerned about where it is. I just think that it is a big concern.
It would fit in C, if you're looking for a place, on page 7, C.
It sure might be, Bruce.
This is generally covered in C and generally covered in our code in conflicts. If we single out just the planning commission, because until we change the historic preservation, you have that issue with them as well. So to go into that level of specificity here, I think it implies that it only is a rule that applies to planning commission versus historic. I mean, I guess we could do both. But if you want to go into that level of specificity, I think it's better for the protocols than these are the rules to run the meeting.
We're kind of in a box. What the comment that Jim's making, and then we compare it to, they must disclose any outside information they have about the case and excuse themselves, et cetera, et cetera. Well, that would be outside information that they have about the case, so you'd have to disclose you watched it on TV. And I don't know that that's helpful. I'm kind of agreeing with Jim. It's not a good situation to have your ability to make a judgment damaged by the fact you watched it on TV.
And
Or
the planning
went to the
commission-
meeting.
And the historic preservation is not on TV.
Well, I guess what I'm saying is there's a lot of different scenarios where you would have information outside the meeting, and you're limiting it to such a great level of specificity by just calling out TV and planning that it almost excludes all the other situations where you would have a duty to disclose. I'm not saying that it can't go in here, it just doesn't make a lot of sense to be so narrowly focused, because you could have conversations that we're not putting in here that you would need to disclose. But by getting to that level of specificity, you're implying that that's the only situation where this applies.
Jerry?
Now, should this apply to anything we read
Well,
outside of the meeting too? I mean, either disclose that we've read something in a book or something in a magazine or something in a paper. I mean,
you as the judge are the one who determines whether something has influenced your decision prior to the meeting. I think there is a situation where you could watch a planning commission meeting on TV and not necessarily be predisposed in your decision. So you, when you make the decision sitting there, are the one that has to decide whether you've been influenced. It could be something like you've described, but not necessarily. That's your call at the time. I think if you are on the fence as to whether something has influenced you before the meeting, just by disclosing it is enough to get you beyond that conflict.
next.
I think Kirsten explained it.
Okay.
Let's go on to the next thing, which is under A, legislative. That last sentence there, I think, needs a little bit of help. It says the council may postpone or continue a public hearing to a later date by announcing the public hearing, this specific date,
Oh, yeah.
time and place. So announcing during A or at A or something, it just needs a little
At, isn't it?
wordsmithing there.
At a public hearing.
At the,
Leave.
I just think you're supposed
I'm
to
sorry, right here?
add an at right after announcing. Oh, sorry, back up. Council may postpone or continue a public hearing by announcing at.
That's the
It's the
public
first
hearing.
word after announcing should not be crossed
There,
out.
that,
yeah.
Exactly.
put add back in there.
Okay, sorry.
Okay, everybody okay with that? Okay. Anything else in 4, Jim?
Nope.
Does anybody else have anything in 4?
Yes. So page 6 in U, changes and additions to these rules and procedures. That section is covered specifically in the changes addition section of 5. I'm getting
What letter were you on?
Oh,
You.
okay.
U.
And then Roman numeral 5.
It's a little,
Actually,
Different.
you're looking at the renumbering there, Wendy.
There it
so
is. I see it now, sorry.
are you, is your recommendation then to remove it from U and just let it stand under 5?
Yeah, and then probably we would change that heading in U to just suspension. So we'd have a section on suspension, but not changes or additions, and then just use what we have on
Okay.
5.
Everybody okay with that? Okay.
And then on 5, we don't need the word entire if we say 4 members, because 4 members is the real criterion.
Okay, where are you at on the second one?
The last word.
Well, I think the 4 was in there in case someone was absent. And then it would still have to be a majority. So when you say the entire council, if one is absent or two are absent, we still would need a vote of 4 to pass.
Right, it would be a majority of who's there.
Right.
Yeah,
Wait a minute.
which,
No.
it's the only thing that this starts to make,
It's an affirmative vote of 4. You have to have at least 4 votes, 4 yeses.
I understand that, but I understood you to say that having the word entire wasn't necessary in
Right, I
there.
don't think so, because if you need, unless we're, I'm sorry, go ahead.
But if 2 council members are absent
You still need 4 votes.
of the entire council,
No, the entire council's 7.
I understand. So you'd still need 4 votes. If there were 6 of us sitting up there, you'd still need 4 according
Yeah.
to this.
Yeah.
Not, so if you had, well, now I'm talking myself, yeah, I'm back to where you're at.
Yeah.
But I don't see that entire is an unnecessary word. Phil?
the only thing that I was going to leave it to our committee to come up with a revision to this, but if we're talking about some of the other boards and commissions that have more than 7 members, the intent of this is that it's a majority of the seats, whether they're occupied or not, and the language should so reflect this so that it can apply to other boards and commissions and committees, et cetera.
Okay.
Is
Yeah.
that-
Go ahead and finish that conversation.
Is that necessary because these are to amend the council legislative rules? We have already stated at the front end of this that, in the front end of this document, that these supersede anything else that they would set up on their own, and any bylaws that they have on their own, they can set how they want to amend those, but
Well,
they
I
don't have
suppose
discretion.
a board or a committee could amend a rule. You know, what's interesting, though, is that we say this is a guiding principle, so I don't really think you need to amend the rule to not use a rule. So it's 6 1/2 dozen.
But at least I took our intent in the guidance here is it would be of the seats, whether they're occupied that evening or not, it would be majority
That's
of
right.
the seats.
That's right.
And so I
Got
was
it.
just trying to,
Thanks.
Yeah, I think it should, the clarity is good.
Okay.
Okay.
Are we
Jim?
removing you? Removing you?
Don't take that personally.
Tonight? I don't know.
Then the question I've got, if you're removing it, do you need that last sentence back in there someplace as part of 5, Roman numeral 5? That if it's a rule requiring 2/3 vote, that it requires 2/3 of council to do anything with it.
Well, we're keeping the first part of you, which talks about suspension. We're just removing the second paragraph of you.
And then you-
Oh, so the whole first paragraph you're keeping?
Yeah,
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, gotcha.
With the exception of the title.
yeah, we're taking changes and additions out of that and just leaving the word suspension. And then the changes and additions will be only on V, AKA 5.
Okay, and then what are we doing with 5 now? I just put a majority of seats, are we going to let Kirsten?
We are going to clarify it to apply also to boards and commissions. So maybe just make a note in there, clarify applicable to boards and commissions, and then I'll work on the language.
Then on 5, I have another question related to that. I think we need a statement about if we vote to change something, when that change can go into effect. And the reason I'm saying that is I could envision a situation where somebody would change a rule that would make it impossible to do something that normally is done because somebody was trying to manipulate. Some people, majority was 4 people were trying to constrain something. For example, deleting the provision that when you would be able to reconsider something. And if we voted on it right now and said you can only reconsider it within 10 minutes of when the vote was cast, then you've changed a significant rule. So it seems to me you shouldn't be able to change a rule that during that very meeting could significantly affect what was being done. And generally, historically, I think councils have gotten along pretty darn well on things, but I still don't think you should just be able to amend it right in the course of a meeting.
So add something along the lines of a final sentence that says, changes and additions will be effective at the next regular meeting,
Yeah,
or if you want to have, or a special
right,
meeting.
yeah. We'll go into the effect at the end of this meeting, maybe. Could do it that way. I mean, not this meeting, but maybe Kirsten could work on wording on that.
Jim, I guess I got a little concerned about that. I have to think through it a little bit, but it seems like that maybe the purpose of trying to make the changes is being affected by what you're talking about that night, which would be appropriate to do.
Well, suppose we had 4 people only, for whatever reason, at a meeting, and we have something that says you need 4 votes for something, and you change the 4-vote requirement to a majority of those present. So 3 people.
I think that if you've got, every one of us are very independent thinkers, and if you can't get consensus for 4 people to do something, then it's probably not a good idea in the first place. So whenever you're trying to change it from 4 to a majority, I think more than likely it's probably not going to pass anyway.
Well, no,
Jerry?
I agree with Peggy on this. I don't think it's a good idea to make rules just before we're getting ready to vote on something. I would rather it be effective after that meeting or for the next regular meeting. I agree with you on that.
Bruce?
And I would like to say a special meeting also, because you might be doing this in anticipation of something you know is going to happen that you have to have a special meeting for. So I'm not as worried about it being an overthrow as I am that you might have to be very fast-paced for something.
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Bruce, you look pensive.
Well, I thought, haven't there been situations, hasn't this come up a couple different times? I'm trying to recollect that we've had, and maybe it was, maybe there was one where we had to give notice or something at such a point in time, and Doug had sort of an explanation 6-8 months ago. We didn't do something in accordance with a rule, and we voted to go ahead and proceed anyway. So I can't recall the specifics of it, but. Huh?
We did, it was the posting of an agenda.
Was that what it was?
Yes.
And yes, and there was a strong disagreement with that.
Michael?
I think it's a question of intent, because if you go back to paragraph 1C, the last sentence states, no action of the city shall be deemed invalid because of failure to follow any rule or order of business provided herein. So you can do that anyway. So I think it's a question of what statement do you want to make to each other, and what's the standard rule that you would want to apply to, and decide based upon that, knowing that at the end of the day, it's a democratic decision, and a majority will take precedent. Just another variable to throw out.
Thanks.
You're welcome. I'm here for you.
Are we leaving the 4 members in? Is that the issue?
I think
No.
the 4 members stays, 4 members of the entire council stays.
Okay, so in that case, if what you're saying is,
It would be
in
some.
your example, it would be 4 members you had 4 people at a meeting, it was quorum, collectively they decided to abrogate one of the rules that we're agreeing to here
In order to affect something at that meeting.
at that meeting, and then, so essentially you'd have to have all four of them do it, which would still be a majority of council,
Which in theory they could do, had all 7 been there at the next meeting.
I suppose. Yeah. So I guess
Hence the
it seems,
Yeah.
it's hard to, I'm having a hard time trying to come up with a scenario where
Well, I guess if everybody just got on their absolute worst behavior, and there was a coup being launched of some sort, that is what, but
yeah.
it doesn't,
I just like the idea of, if the issue is the effective date of it, of the numbers,
Right.
I still like it to be at the next meeting. It gives the appearance of changing rules just so we can get to a certain answer. And I just don't like the appearance of that.
Yeah.
well, we can always move that item also, so.
Well, then that would be up for discussion at that point.
Right. So if we don't like what's going on, we can make a tweak. And so we do have ways of
And I'm
handling
more
it, so I
comfortable with
agree.
that than changing
I
how we
agree.
do business.
Right.
I think-
Phil?
The part that I wanted to ask is, are we saying that it's at the end of the meeting, or is it as of the next? Because each of those are somewhat different, and if we're looking for really, really bad behavior, what it is you adjourn the meeting, and then you call another special meeting, you might not go through the posting rules, but those are optional anyway, because you can kind of vote without the post. So now you have the next meeting, so it goes back into effect. I'm just saying, from a bad behavior perspective, Jerry's point is maybe at the next meeting is if you want a time frame there. I'm not sure. And the other part that I want to mention on Peggy is if someone was going to be in a minority of the 4, so that then it would be 3 votes against 1, they would have to have a lapse in judgment to agree with the suspension of the rules that would allow for them not to have a controlling vote.
Well,
Well, and Phil, to your point, it does state in here that the proposed changes have been made publicly posted at the same time. So it does qualify a posting. So I don't know that we could adjourn and start a meeting right after that. That we're covered there. Bruce, did you have something else? Bruce, did you? Bruce,
Which Bruce?
are you good, Bruce? Who's good, Bruce, tonight? Okay.
Just
Not
her-
sure. We haven't.
You haven't arm wrestled yet?
But I think also we keep saying if the council's behaving badly, I mean, if the council always behaves correctly, we wouldn't need rules. So I think it is important to leave this in.
Next item.
Okay, so let's do a show of hands for those who are in favor of adding commentary to the fact that the changes would take effect at the next regular or special meeting. Those who would agree with that. Okay, 6. So then you guys will wordsmith that, come back next time. Okay, any other comments or questions? Are we, all right? Great, thank you. That was a lot of work on staff's part. Thank you very much for all that.
2 down, 1 to go.
Okay, we are moving to proposed council goals and objectives. And we'll kind of go through it the same way. I think what we'll do is, council, if you'd rather look at it based on the larger topic or go through it based on, get into the each objective and probably just, let's start and see how we fly. Okay, number 1, assure a finance.
I had
Peggy?
comment about that. I scribbled all over this big time, and, I mean, there's lots of good stuff in here, but one thing came to my mind is, and I don't know if we can do this, certainly not on the spot, that it would kind of be nice to have a statement about what the vision, the current vision, what the view we have of the city is. Like, I don't know how to phrase it, but just to say we want to have a community where, a friendly community, if we just wanted to have that. Or I did bring copies of this wherever I find it in a minute. I created my own approach, and it's probably right here in front of me. And I had only 2 main statements. And then I got all the same kinds of things in sub-statements for each of those, because it seemed to me there are 2 main things that we want. We want to assure a financially sound city government, and we want to preserve, enhance Littleton as a premier destination in the metro area. And it would be premier for work, live, operate a business, visit, shop, dine, attend school, K through 12 and college, play, receive medical services. All of those would be, in my head, of part of what premier is. I was trying to figure out all this stuff. But that's what it seems to me we're wanting, or a premier destination for family-friendly folks or whatever to live and do these things. So I thought we had too many goals here, and I thought we could collapse them, and I can share with you what I did. But then all of the things that are in here would wind up in fewer goals with some sub-goals, and then the objectives and the strategies under those. So,
Bruce.
How did we arrive at these? It looks to me like a lot of staff work went into it. I would guess you asked department heads to work with you on that and all. So I would like to respect the work that the staff has done and work off of that. However, I think mission, vision, and value statements still are needed.
So first of all, on the mission and vision, quite honestly, when I was thinking about this, I thought going from, since we hadn't had any goals and objectives historically, mission and visions can be somewhat flowery for some, if you'll allow me, and that probably starting a little more concrete and then potentially backing into that. I actually, when Peggy was just discussing it, I think you can have words like a family-friendly community that values its past and ensures sustainability for future generations. I mean, you definitely can come up with something like that. So we'd be happy to assist in whatever level if that's something the council desires. No issue with that at all, Bruce. And then let me first say that we're not wedded to anything. We have very thick skin, and you guys can reformat this to your heart's content. This is really a document for you all. I mean, the way I see this document primarily being used is, and I say primarily, is one is by you all in terms of when somebody comes to you and or even with each other. You know, we can easily get sidetracked with whatever the latest and greatest shiny thing that shows up on the city front steps are. But how does that tie into what the council has identified where you want us to be focused over the next couple of years? And that same statement is true and probably doubly true internally. So as staff, when somebody calls up, the local salesman calls up on something, we have the latest whatever, it gives us that barometer, if you will, to say, okay, I can see how this ties into the council goals, or this might be a good idea, but it's not really in alignment with where we are right now. And then you can make some informed decisions about, do you want to bring that to council and say, hey, instead of working on this, we're going to work on that. And it's really not intended to be tied directly to the budget, because money comes and goes. But this is, where do you guys see there's 7 of you that got elected here. What is it that you're passionate about that you want to see this community evolve to over that next 2 years? Because you guys are going to be working together for 2 years. So this document really should be for you. And certainly, yes, Bruce, we did put some time and effort into it, but I very much want to convey that if you want to lump it into one gargantuan goal, or if you want the mission statement to cover all the goals, we just tried to do our best to capture. My request was more that we didn't end up with 15 goals. 7 or 8 seemed like a good number in there, and then try to put some things under it. So it's really for you. That was a very long-winded way of saying do what you want.
And as we start to get into this, I think that one of the things that is really important for us as a council to keep in mind is our role, and our role really is a policy level role. We have a qualified staff that are more than capable of fleshing out the details, giving us all the particulars and all of that stuff. But at the end of the day, those big decisions are ours to make, and it's our responsibility to flesh out from everything what are those priorities for us. And I think this is a good first step on what are our priorities for the next 2 years, and how do we want to move forward with those with the staff and to actually get things done. And so one of the things we've heard fairly consistently from staff, and I don't always agree with it, but that they have not felt as though they've gotten clear direction. And I think this is an opportunity for us to do that and to give them, here's the goal, here's where we want to head. If you guys know how to get there, and you can get us there. And let them do what they do best while we're, as Michael said, elected to do what we ran on doing, and that's leading. So I would say let's go ahead and again, Peggy, staff did put this together for us. I appreciate that you've spent a lot of time on it and rewritten it, but I do think
No, I
let's go
didn't
through.
rewrite all of it. I had a different way of laying it out.
Okay.
And I will try to get my brain between some things I put on what I did that maybe aren't in here, and
Okay.
that's important too, so.
Well, it is 10 minutes till 6. I would suggest, why don't we take a quick 10-minute, grab dinner, come back and work through it, because we'll have an hour to talk through it before we start our other meeting. Okay,
We can discuss this while we're eating,
while we're eating, working dinner.
the working dinner.
Okay,
Recess, in other words.
recess for dinner, yeah. Okay, we're starting on goals and objectives. Number 1, assure a financially sound city government. The first objective is balance the budget. I guess what we'll do is just have a discussion, then if anybody has any comments or additions or concerns with the objective, I guess we'll start with. We'll kind of see how we work through this. Bruce? Did you have your?
I did.
Yeah. Oh.
Please.
Yeah, you guys. I'll just say Bruce and you guys figure it out.
Meet fund reserve policy. I wasn't sure whether that was 16% or what that is. I wanted to suggest that it would be helpful to have a separate line item that says reserve, and that we're not trying to develop the fund reserve balance, the fund reserve based on balances in accounts, but it's actually an identified line. And it could be that I've missed that in the budget in the past, but it would be helpful to say it here if people were to agree with me on that.
I'm sorry, so just to be clear, that's actually in the budget you're talking about, a detail?
I would like to see a detailed line that says reserve. And then if it's 16%, you're going to see the, whatever, 3 million, whatever you're going to need to see.
Any issues?
I guess I don't understand the question, because we do have reserve policies that vary based on the reserve. And that was one of the things we needed to do as part of the ASB this past year, is actually establish a reserve policy for each of the reserves.
If that's happened, then I was not aware that you had done that.
Yeah, and it's something that's been done.
Okay.
Okay. Peggy, did you?
On the objective itself, I would suggest that we change it to spend within our means, because we can have a balanced budget, but then get out of sync on what we're doing. So that would cover having, I was trying to have a balanced budget to start with, but it also would allow us to add, sorry, you're probably not hearing me, allow to add another bullet in there too, which I'll mention in a minute. So either that or adopt and implement a balanced budget.
Okay, Peggy's suggesting that we change balance the budget to spend within our means. I guess my only comment was when I saw balance the budget, well, we have to balance the budget, so making it an objective isn't really, it's already a mandate in charter. And I thought perhaps if we said maintain a balanced budget. And Bruce.
I took this whole thing maybe somewhat more broadly. I kind of thought the overall objective was fiduciary responsibility. There are, as you said, I mean, we have to balance the budget. We have to draw reserves to maintain a balanced spending budget. There may be reasons for doing that. There may be reasons for not doing it in any given year. But overall, I thought this whole thing had to more or less, the intent, our overall objective is to maintain or to honor the fiduciary responsibility we have to the citizens, and how we do that is the debate.
Okay. Jim? So I guess does anybody see on the issue of the objective, balance the budget without going straight to the weeds? Basically, it is what it is, right? Regarding strategy, Peggy, you said you wanted to add a strategy in there?
Yes, I did. I want to change one first, to set a goal to receive an unqualified audit opinion. Just check with Mr. Farman on this one. I'd like to have it read, employ practices consistent with receiving an unqualified audit opinion.
Good. You don't have to check with anyone, these are your goals.
No, but I wanted to make sure that in terms of the audit, it seemed to me that that would work. So what is it we would be actually doing? And then I'd like to add a strategy.
Could you say that again?
Oh, employ
Practices consistent.
with receiving an unqualified audit opinion. Because I wanted to focus as close as I could to the actual behavior.
Okay, before we move on, Peggy, is everybody okay with that change? Employ practices consistent with receiving an unqualified audit opinion.
Well, if you please, you can't get one without the other. I mean, so getting an unqualified audit opinion, you're not going to get it if you don't have practices consistent with. That's the internal control
Right,
side of the whole thing.
but that's what you're wanting to focus on, employ those darn practices.
But I think that's incumbent in the goal to receive an unqualified audit opinion. I mean, if your goal is to get an unqualified opinion, you're going to have practices that are consistent with receiving it.
So we're just restating what was...
Yeah, I think
okay.
that the context, I'm not hung up on it either way, but I guess what I'm saying is I think it's fine as is by virtue of the fact that they're not going to give you one if you don't have the processes in place.
Well, right, but what we know, I mean, you've been on the audit subcommittee for a few years. What you think you're doing, you didn't necessarily do all you should have done, and then you don't quite get something. You get a little flag or whatever. And I don't think that's too much so in the past 4 years. But the focus is on being aware of those practices that are going to achieve that. So I don't mind if you don't want to change that, or if you want to shorten it or whatever.
I'll defer. I mean, I'm just saying,
I don't really want to go through here and change wording and mean the same thing. I mean, if we've got a problem with the context or the substance of this, then that's what we need to probably push through. But if if you guys are saying the same thing.
No. Bruce and I are saying the same thing, but that's not saying, I think, what this is. So
Okay.
I'm just objecting to setting a goal. That doesn't, you can set a goal and fall way short. So I wanted to get at what is more likely to get us to achieve the goal.
Okay, so those who are okay with employed practices consisting with receiving an unqualified audit opinion, raise your hand. Okay, we'll change that. Peggy?
The one I wanted to add, I think, touches something that you said. Curtail expenditures if monthly revenues fall short of projections. And that's something I think city manager's been doing for years. So if your projections are falling, if your revenues are falling short of what you project for that point, then you curtail expenditures.
Okay, do you want to... Okay, is everybody okay with adding that bullet? Okay, hold
And
on.
it'd be plural expenditure.
Plural expenditures, please. Phil, did you have... And then
I have
Bruce.
something else that I think is in this area, which is, I'd like to see us be at a point where our budget process is one that we have and anticipate at the beginning, we're going to have a discussion around the trade-offs as to expenditures in the budget are higher or lower, what is gotten to or not gotten to. My short-term phrase for that is understanding our outcomes, and we have some way to measure those, and that enters into our budget process, so we can really have an adult, I would refer to it as an adult, so we understand the trade-offs that are there in our budget process.
Yeah, I'm going to echo, I think, what maybe where Phil's going on this one. I think we need to stop at the moment. I want to call timeout on going through this thing bullet by bullet. I think the concept of what are we trying to get out of the budgeting process is a discussion topic. I'm having a heartburn here with there's a lot of bullet points that we can add in here for strategy kind of stuff, and it can take forever to get through it. But I don't think we're going to have, it's a value add relative to sort of describing, what do we mean when we generally, to each one of us, talk about, our fiduciary responsibility collectively to the community. I think Phil's point is spot on. I mean, I think going this to the, Peggy, no disrespect, but I mean the budget process, curtailing expenditures of revenues fall short of projections, I mean, that's a decision the council will make, or we could alternately draw down reserves, or there's a lot of different ways to approach that. So I don't think getting that narrow into the specific strategy is what we should be doing at this juncture. I think it should be concept-oriented, as in, Jerry, what do you think about this general topic? Jim, Bruce, Peggy, Phil, so forth and so on. And then I think we ought to come back and maybe machinate or marinate the strategies at some point versus sit here and try to go through line item bullets. That's just my thought on this thing. This is different than protocols and legislative procedures.
And I think I had put this in my communication to the council, that my request is that you primarily focus on the goal and the objective. A lot for that very reason. Because it's my intent and my hope is that those become generally clear, that, and obviously if there's a specific strategy that you want to add, there's no issues around it, but my hope is that what will occur is we will take this, we staff will take this document, and then we will start to flush out some actions around those strategies that you've identified. And at the February meeting, we will come in and we will be discussing those with you. And you will say, yes, we've hit the mark, we want to add, and that's where we'll get much more of that minutia and detailed, or at least one of the locations from it. We'll take that. We really struggled, if I may, Mayor, on putting strategies in there at all and to what level we wanted to put them, because the danger was, of course, getting into the weeds on any particular thing and getting into exactly how you want to deal with the budget for 2013, et cetera, et cetera. And so we're guilty of having both combinations in there. You've got, just as a quick example, maintain city infrastructure and facilities. Well, to the extent that you wanted to flesh that out, the way I think about that is that means when we're thinking about things, we will maintain what we have now, the expenditure that we've put into the public, from the public. That's what we want to retain first before we go buy something new out there and we let this fall apart. So, that's a high-level statement as opposed to starting to get into the smaller stuff in it. But and what we mainly struggled with in putting this together was which strategies to include and which we didn't. So we added a bunch, we took some out. So just to the extent that I concur with Bruce, if you can stay out of that, but make sure we don't miss anything in some of those key strategies if you have one. It's one of those tempering the conversation too much so you miss something, but making sure that you all agree a financially sound city government is a core goal that you have, and balancing the budget or whatever words you end up with is key to that.
And what I don't want to lose is the element that in this, if you wanted to say what's our goal, is that we elevate our discussion with information and knowledge that will come to the table, okay, so and whether we participate in establishing the outcome measures or how they come about being set, that the whole budget process, yes, we're going to balance the budget, and part of it is then once the budget is set, at least for those things that are underneath the city manager, to make it work. And I understand that at times you may call on some of the priorities of whether it's maintain or build, and I can understand some of that questions, but if you wanted to say the goal in this one is we need to elevate our budget process so we understand better the trade-offs. There's never going to be a perfect understanding, but we understand better the trade-offs, and we can do a better job of prioritizing within that budget process.
Bruce?
See, I think part of this also, I didn't see anything in here generally about encouraging creativity. You know, how do we look at return on investment kinds of projects? Should we look at return on investment kinds of projects? So, for example, the energy efficiency kind of stuff. Maybe that's in the sustainability section. But just some level of creativity or encouragement of creativity in terms of driving the innovative, cost-effective delivery of municipal services, or research and pursue other alternative revenue sources. Broadly speaking, how exotic do we feel you guys should get? The reserves question, I think, is really good. We've got some fairly healthy reserves at this point. How does this council feel generally about maintaining the quote-unquote the 16, 17% kind of number in terms of reserves to spend, if you will, versus what we were doing, which was 6 to 8. I don't know what the comfort level is, but to me, that's the conversation, as opposed to specifically, drilling down too deep.
Jerry?
Yeah, I would like to say, I'd kind of like to see us move on, look at the goals, the objectives, and then move on without being hung up on these strategy things.
Okay. Jim?
That's where I think I was leading to, because why do we need to have the detailed discussion about the strategies? If we just talk about the objectives and let staff deal with what the strategies are. And I understand the need sometimes to add a strategy in there that's maybe missing, or we'd like to see. But it's going to take us forever to get through all of this if we keep this level of
The
detail.
strategies are dynamic. They change with the wind almost sometimes.
Well, you can't central plan them that way either. I mean, you don't really want to. You want them
Right.
to be flexible.
It needs to be flexible.
Okay. I'm all for it.
So
Peggy?
that's fine with me. I misunderstood something, I guess, when I talked to the city manager today. But I think strategies need to be strategies. And for my training, I think 3 of the things called strategies in the first objective of number 1 are not strategies. So I hope somewhere there will be ability to informally or otherwise outside of meeting give some feedback about that. And then some of these, I'd like us to have a way when you work on these, if a strategy or an objective for one of the goals also has import for another goal or objective, in an objective in a different goal, there'd be a cross-reference to that, because we get more bang for our buck if we understand that, geez, if we do this, it's going to have several effects on several goals.
I think Bruce just gave an example. If you have something that hits an environmental goal under the promote sustainable environmental policies and also has a benefit to the economics of the city, you've got a great example. And I will say again what I said a few minutes ago. If you don't like the word strategy, put the word action item in there. Put whatever. It's like mission and vision. Some people like the word mission, some like vision, goal, objective. I mean, there's other places that will reverse those two. So you guys figure out what word resonates for you. If strategy's not it, make it something different that meets what the list is.
Fine with me on that. But what I'm saying is, if it is a strategy, whether you call it an action item or not, it ought to be indeed an action item or a strategy that connects to the stated objective, which connects to the stated goal. And there are at least 3, as I said, in here, but I'll talk with you later about it.
Bruce Beckman?
A feeling that I had looking at these was that they were rather constrained. There were a lot of getting back to basics seems to me to be a philosophy that showed itself in a lot of these. And what I would like to see is, or what I'd like to present, is that the idea that council is willing to have department heads try something new and different to adapt to changes and challenges. So in talking about these objectives and strategies, a value might be a willingness demonstrated by council to allow department heads and yourself as the manager to try something new and different And I'm afraid if we didn't have it in writing here, they might be hesitant to do it, or if we adopted these, they would feel this is what they're limited to do. And so somewhere there's a dynamic approach to change that we want to make sure we incorporate.
Love it, yeah.
Yeah,
Go
that's
for it.
great.
Yeah.
Bruce?
Yeah, I agree with that. You know, just in a general sense on maybe, say, the first goal and the second goal, I mean, like I said, for my money, I think the concept of financially sound government has to do with an acknowledgement, you know, right out front that our objective is to be fiscal, have a fiduciary responsibility for the taxpayers' money, to be smart with our investments, to be smart with our spending, and to be creative in terms of absolutely researching and pursuing alternative revenue sources without taking big risks. So whether that means, you know, test bed kind of stuff, partnering.
So did you want to propose some wording?
No, not really.
Oh, okay.
I'm just giving you guys my 2 cents worth, and then I would say if you guys want to massage this a little bit more based on what everybody says, that's great. But I don't want to try to wordsmith this right now. What I do want to do is get into concepts, and you know, certainly the fiduciary responsibility side of it is manifested in the cost-efficient delivery of municipal services, and I think the staff's, you know, done a very credible job of that over the last several budget cycles. Obviously, that's not a pressure that's going to go away. It's a reality of life, and we just have to figure out more effective ways of doing service delivery, whether it's, to quote Chief Coogan, you know, tools, technology, training, so forth and so on. But that applies everywhere. You know, again, the reserve issue, I think we need to you know, have some conversations about what the appropriate reserve policy is. On number 2, I don't have, I think this is, you know, part of the community's DNA, right? It's a safe community in which to live, work, and play.
We staying with one, or are we moving on?
Huh?
Are we staying with one, or are we moving on?
Does anybody else have anything
Yeah,
on
I was
mind?
just, okay, fine.
Yeah, let's.
That's okay.
Well, I was
Go ahead.
where I wanted, if you wanted to say action items and that with regard to the budget process, if we're going to, if the staff is looking to engage the council in helping to set priorities or determining some of the outcomes, that would be an involvement that I would expect you would come to. But when I see number 1, as I read it, a bunch of this is, as far as, you know, what I would say from a policy perspective, is keeping the lights on. There's not a prioritization call yet in anything that I would read on this. This is like doing the job well. Maybe a review of the reserve policy would maybe be something that would be there. But if you said, okay, what are going to be some of the trade-offs, and how do we move and elevate our discussion and prioritization to that level? You know, do we need to be looking at, do we need to engage the community to move more towards an outcomes-based approach, so we understand what are some of the trade-offs when we get to making spending decisions, and understand that. And so, if you know, when we're talking about financially sound government, we're making some of the, or we're being asked to make some of the priority calls on spending, but we don't, you know, at least historically, we don't always understand the trade-offs in those, and to be in a position that it brings our discussion and ability to set those priorities at a better level. That's why I didn't want to move on to number 2.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Jim?
Well, 2 comments. Number 1, I think Bruce's Beckman is correct in that when you put these strategies down on paper, they may be looked at as limiting, and I think that we want to have the creative part of staff come about. And frankly, I think we can just do away with all the strategies and go with the objectives. And then staff can work on what the strategies are to achieve the objective. But I do want to propose perhaps one more objective for item number 1, and that is along the lines of proactive recruitment for new businesses, because that is another way in which you can get a financially sound city government.
Oh,
That's sort
we
of
do have
number 3.
number 3.
Yeah, I do have number 3.
I know, and I looked at that too.
That's where I'm saying I see
Put
this.
it- Well, I think that's a good comment that then Michael can just make it fit where it's appropriate to fit.
What do you mean by proactive recruitment?
Well, if we're looking for a financially sound government, you can do it by tightening the belt if you get into a financial crisis, or you can look at trying to raise new revenue through some source, and raising new revenue through having new businesses come to town is a relatively inexpensive way to do that.
I agree with that, but from your standpoint, in terms of the recruitment process, how do you envision that conceptually? Are you talking marketing? Are you talking in-state, out-state? Are you talking tax incentives? I mean,
There's
how far
lots of
down
things
the
you can put into the strategies for accomplishing that.
Okay.
And there again, the devil is always in those details, I guess, but going into those strategies for how you do that, I just want the objective out there and let staff come up with how that might accomplish, because it's not going to happen overnight.
Jerry?
I guess I want to know what this section is supposed to do. Are we supposed to make this a strategic plan, or is this just our goals and objectives? We do need a strategic plan, absolutely, on how we're going to get to where we want to be. But I don't think this section is the strategic plan. I think this is just goals. Isn't that our point here? We're not making this the strategic plan?
Depends upon how you define strategic plan, but ultimately, I think this would be, if I understand your description of it, this would become the framework by which we would then continue to add detail or meat onto those bones, if you will.
Yes. That would be substantially thicker than this, perhaps. Definitely would have paragraphs on how we're going to get to meeting funding reserves. I mean, it would have statements and things like that. But I think if we're just going to have goals and objectives, I think that's what it should be. Limit it to that, goals and objectives. And then we need to have another section that would be a strategic plan, which is also a dynamic plan.
Yeah, and depending upon how you think about it, I mean, especially with Tabor and limiting on future year anticipation, to the extent, and I think this gets to what Phil is discussing, is in a lot of respects, your strategic plan is the adoption of the budget, because that is the allocation of resources for a given year. And I mentioned to the mayor that I think there are some ways that we can go about the budget conversation that addresses a lot of what Phil and Bruce have been discussing, well, and both Bruces actually, relative to both trade-offs. And, that to me is where you have, as an example, you have the discussion about whatever the reserve fund policy, because that can change on a however basis you want. Meeting that would be your goal. Whatever you've set the bar at, your goal is to meet that expectation with it. So we'd have to kind of fine-tune what your definition of the strategic plan, and is it separate from the budget? Is there areas where you really want to drill down and get into a level of detail? And we're starting with kind of the one, if you will, that is the bread and butter of when you get elected. I mean, the most important thing you do to a sense is adopt the budget. You're allocating the public's resources. You start to move beyond one, and you start to get into more of the stuff where it is probably easier to set goals, and it's less connected with that kind of core constitutional requirement for budgeting pieces of it. So
I guess I'll go back to my opening statement. What is the point of this section? Is it just going to be our goals and objectives, or is it going to be goals, objectives, and strategy? That is my question. Is if we're just going to have goals and objectives, I think that's fine with me, but we do need to have a section then that would have strategy, and that might, and probably is, a part of the budget.
So my intent, again, is to take what you determine to be your goals and objectives, and again, any specific strategies that any of you want to put in here, and then I would work with the department heads before the February 10th meeting, and we would try to flush that out, identify what that means. I mean, some of them, it's a one sentence. We'll meet whatever reserve fund policy, and if there's a desire to revisit that, you can revisit that as many times as you want. But we would then identify what strategies we would put in place, what action items we would put in place in order to meet those objectives, which are in service of that goal. So I think it's both. My concern had been that we would focus, because it's kind of a natural tendency, human tendency, to get down into the weeds and talk about how you develop a process to ensure departmental adherence to maintaining adopted budget. Well, that's really not what we need, because I want to make sure that all 7 of you are in agreement that assuring a financially sound city government is a goal, and that we've identified your objective components within that. So I picture that we're going to keep adding to this as we get through. We come to you in February, and we'll have a lot of meat on those bones, and we'll come and say, we'll present through it and say, have we hit it? So if that meets the definition for you of strategic plan,
Does.
then
That's what I'm
yes,
saying,
it
but we
will
don't
go
need to
as
have
a-
every single bullet of what we're doing to get there in this section.
Correct.
That
Yeah.
is my point. So, but we're spending a lot of time on the strategy on how we're going to get to that goal and objective. I mean, shouldn't we just be discussing the goals and say, yes, that's the goal we want, and that's the objective we want next, instead of nitpicking how we want to get there with our strategy? I think we're going to be here all year just on this section if we start doing that.
I have a, Peggy?
I can see another aspect of this, and that might be related policies. We don't have policies about very much, but we do have a reserve fund policy. That's really important, and that's mentioned here. And since we already have touched over briefly onto Goal 3 with the business piece, if we don't have some of this in here, we won't, and we just say, here's our goal, or here's our goal and our primary objectives, we could wind up potentially saying, recruit whatever business you want and put it any old place in Littleton that you want. And I know you can't do it exactly that way, but that you can crowd it up against this or crowd it up against that as long as you stay within the crowding limits. I don't think that's what we want. And I'm looking particularly at number 3, first strategy, first objective, last strategy. Evaluate economic incentives to encourage business retention, growth, and recruitment. That sounds to me like we're going to provide money in some way, directly or after the fact or something, to bring people here. That seems to me to be a policy issue, contradictory to what has been going on of growing our own without giving incentives otherwise. So I want to make sure that we have enough detailed discussion in writing, whatever, that we know we have a sense of how that's all fitting together.
And one of my comments was based on what Jim's suggested addition on objectives is it's the same, I guess my feeling on that is that does go back to being a policy issue as to, because Littleton has never done that, and we have not incented and we have not recruited as such. So if that is something that we're changing as a policy issue, then I think it certainly moves up outside of the objective, and we need to discuss that almost on a whole different level before we integrate it into our goals and objectives, because I don't know that that's been determined that would be a goal or objective yet.
And I would, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I would say that, some of these that we wrote in here, to me at least, the interpretation of let me say I agree with Peggy to the extent that you want to make sure that you have an understanding of, you got to have enough detail, and that's that trade-off of what is the fine line of the tightrope that you're walking in terms of detail. But some of these that are in here have the word evaluate, and the one that Peggy just referred to has the word evaluate. And so to me what that means is, so it says evaluate economic incentives to encourage business. So we would, as staff, go out and evaluate what economic incentives are available to local municipalities. We would bring those back to you, and you would look at what those options are, and we would say, yeah, we're interested in any of them, none of them, some of them, whatever, and you would move forward. So I think the word evaluate or any directive to us through these either objectives or the strategies is you're not committing to it. You might want to say that there are things you want to commit to in here. But again, telling us and telling the community and telling yourselves that you're interested in looking at these things is I think and there's a lot of evaluate the long-term goals. We put a lot of those types of things in there. So,
I guess at the end of the day, it comes down to, do we want to tell you how to do it, or we just want to give you the direct, here's the goal, here's the objective, and then you guys do it.
Yeah, no, I mean, we
And
definitely
bring back.
don't need to tell us, how to go paint the wall, but we need to know enough about the detail that you're.
But when asked, you would have your strategy put together with your team. And that's up for the staff to be doing that, not the city council.
Right.
And I think that's why if we put things in here to some degree, it's going to start limiting what city staff is going to do. I would rather have you bring it to us and say, here's our strategy at getting to, economic development. Instead of our coming up with 4 or 5 bullets and say, hey, go do this in order to reach our goal.
But are we just going to say whatever they bring to us? I mean, I like our staff right now, but are we going to just say whatever you bring to us is just information and we don't have to say we think this is not appropriate?
They're going to bring to us a plan, and we look at it, and if we have a warm fuzzy about it, we would accept it. If we're uncomfortable with it as a majority, then we would discuss that with the city manager.
But we look at it piecemeal, we wouldn't just reject or accept the whole thing.
Well, I think it has to be almost item by item.
Yeah, well, I thought that's what we were doing here, so, sorry. I mean, that's what I thought we were in the process of doing. But what you're saying is give certain feedback at a higher level and then have him bring back the more complete.
I think so.
Yeah, thank you.
Bruce?
We may have like 10 minutes or 15 minutes here before we've got a break, but, I mean, essentially, if this thing is basically the pyramid, what we're trying to do, I think, tonight is provide framework. So if what comes out of here is that if we're comfortable broadly with these goals and or any other goals that people want to add, and we're generally comfortable with the same thing on the objectives, then I think it's incumbent upon staff to do what you're saying, Jerry, which is, start conceptualizing underneath each of these items as you build the skeleton. And then we review that, and it's a dynamic discussion process. I mean, over the next, whether it's to the February meeting or I would assume that would be the objective, is we have an ongoing dialogue on this stuff with an incremental layer of detail every time there's more dialogue that's appropriate. And then by the time we get to the February 10 meeting, we've got something that's got goals, objectives, concept, maybe activity direction is a better way to say it than strategy. And that way then, as activities start percolating under each specific goal and objective, then we do exactly what Jerry's saying, which is we look at the bits and pieces of the thing and we say, okay, we like where you're going here, we're not so comfortable with this. Jim, maybe we like the whole marketing idea externally along to companies on the Front Range. No, we're not comfortable with this, economic incentives overtly. I don't know, beats me. But in a general sense, yeah, I think that's, from a policy perspective, you identify the main policy elements that way, and then we start fleshing in underneath or filling in underneath so that we don't keep going over the same ground repetitively, and B, we can get some traction with staff moving the ball forward in terms of actually starting to work on those individual plans in a given objective category.
Well, let's move ahead through this then. I think let's, in terms of goals, let's run through that real quick and make sure everybody's okay with the goals that are outlined here. The first goal, obviously, assure a financially sound city government. Goal number 2, provide a safe community in which to live, work, and play. Solid. Goal number 3, pursue a balanced and sustainable economy. Goal number 4, promote sustainable environmental policies and practices. 5, preserve and cultivate a quality community. 6, enhance community amenities. 7, foster community involvement and communication. So I guess my comment would be that if there is anyone who has a huge issue with any of those or wants to omit it or has one that they want to add, then that would be point. Okay.
I would like to see something
Jerry,
more specific
Bruce,
for,
Peggy.
I'm sorry, I thought you said Jerry.
Yeah, Jerry, Bruce, Peggy.
Okay, good. I would like to see something maybe more titled infrastructure. It's sort of in there throughout, but I would just rather see the goal about infrastructure, maintaining the infrastructure of some sort. And by that I mean streets, the plumbing, and all that kind of good stuff.
As a
One
Goal.
of the goals.
Could you see it as an objective?
In all kinds of different ways.
No, I mean, I saw that, I had that same, but I thought it belonged under 5, so.
Well, it is listed as a strategy under, for sure, a financially sound city government.
We also have under 5, strategy, ensure city infrastructure and facilities are well designed and well maintained.
Right, and as I said, I'd like to see this as a bullet itself. I mean, not as a bullet, as a
As a goal.
numbered goal in itself. Because I think it is one of the primary things of city government, period.
So make it 8, number 8? Because it probably would not replace anything.
I guess in my own mind, I kind of like the idea of, like, you know, we have number 1 is certainly a top one. Number 2 is certainly a top one. I'd almost like to see it, not necessarily in a priority, but I would like to see it as a higher number up there with 1 and 2. And then the other stuff, sustaining the economy and all this other stuff, yeah, that's all great goals, but these other things, we do have a little bit more control over too.
Okay.
That's just my thought on that.
Well, if nobody has a huge objection to that, then staff can work on tweaking that
You
in.
follow where I am on that, Mike?
Yeah, I got it, thanks.
Okay, and then it's, I'm sorry, Jerry, are you done?
Yes.
Okay. And then it's Bruce, Peggy, and Phil.
Were you done?
Yes.
This may be sort of all-inclusive, but a question in my mind is, should we have a goal as a council and city government to, quote-unquote, do no harm when it comes to property values? In other words, as part of our fiduciary responsibility to maintain and enhance the citizens' property values as a key economic asset that everyone who either lives or owns property in the city has. Now, maybe that's, and I'm asking that literally as a question. I'm not sure. I can see it going either way. I mean, if you do all this other stuff, presumably property values get enhanced, and there's obviously not a lot we can do about the schools or
Talking specifically or in aggregate?
aggregate, I guess. I mean, individual neighborhoods, you know, aside, or individual properties, but I think broadly as a stated goal, is that an objective that in the aggregate we should be seeking to, you know, safeguard property values?
Wealth in the community generally. That's what we're here for.
Okay, as a
Is it objective?
Oh.
Is it a
Overall.
goal? Is it an overall goal? Or is it just sort of,
I think that's an offshoot of, you know, police and fire and infrastructure.
it's part and parcel of everything?
Yeah.
But is it important enough to put out there as sort of a guiding principle? I don't know. I can sort of see yes, I can sort of see no. Maybe I'll throw it out there, and if you guys can figure out a way to do something with it, there you go.
mix it in there. Also, some of the strategies are indicating that maybe it moves up to an objective, and it appears more frequently under some of the
Perhaps.
goals.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay. Peggy?
On 5 and 6, I would like to see those combined. So we're preserving and fostering or cultivating a quality community that has the built community and the other stuff that's in 6, because I kept going back and forth between them.
Okay, that's something you guys can
Yeah.
deal with. The other thing I was even thinking with what Jerry said about infrastructure, number 6, enhance community amenities, and, you know, combining that with the infrastructure, thinking there may be a way to gel all those things together, move it up a little higher. Okay, Phil?
like Jerry's thought on, if we put it at the highest level, if you're talking about what are we looking to do, one is we have certain financial resources that we have to spend in a good way to see that good things are happening. And then the other two, there's actually three things, but one would be safety in the community, the infrastructure in the community, meaning the streets and that. That's when you knock on doors, folks want, when they call the fire department or the police department, they want that response, and so we need to have that. And the other area that Bruce is touching on, which is land use, that's a municipal responsibility that we have as a home rule city to deal with. And so those are the ones that are there. The other set is kind of like the things that we're doing to make Littleton special in some of that regard. And so if you start with those 3.5 and you work your way down. What my thought is to help prep staff for a good February 10th, there are things I'm passionate about that we don't have time to talk about, that if you have those as the buckets that we have here, and we pass them on to Michael, and then you have a chance to grapple with it between now and February 10th to prep something that's going to be good. But part of it is the process that we have to go through, too, in some of this, and trying to squeeze it into a 75-minute discussion where we have 7 folks around the table is going to be kind of tough. So what I was thinking is, give me the buckets, and I'll tell you the things I'm passionate about, and try and put them in buckets.
I think you guys are doing a good job in 10 minutes of developing those buckets.
Jim?
Yeah. Well, I don't know where it belongs, but somewhere I think we ought to have in here something having to do with preventing our undeveloped land from becoming a converted to parks and open space. We've got such limited amount of developable land that I think we need to have somewhere an objective that we're going to try to make our larger tracts of land developable as opposed to being a park.
Is it going to come to us in the open space task force report, right? Which I saw in my head as I looked at this, having a little higher profile in this document.
Yeah, and that does cross into that a bit, and we'll have that report before workshop. So I think we can integrate it into workshop discussions and blend it into this. 'Cause when I was talking to Michael earlier today, so I can see where a lot of what we're doing on that task force applies to some of what we're talking about here, and it's to your point, too.
I did not see mentioned in here anything about a point of view toward customer service or quality service overall as an organization. And maybe it would fit with the infrastructure concept that Jerry's talking about.
And I think when you think about policy versus administration, what we set up for you was Section 7, because in terms of your role in that, when you're setting policy, if you want to, we've got the task force looking at the boards and commissions. That's really, to me, where, from a policy standpoint, you want to make sure that when you're making a decision, you are fostering community involvement and communication. Don't disagree at all with that, Bruce, but I would tell you that the customer service aspect is administrative action, a function of implementation of that, which would come into essentially this version of it within the staff realm of it, unless I'm missing the intent.
Well, the intent would be that it would be from the highest levels of council and from the expectations of the community that we represent. People want quality service, and they want to know that their issues are being dealt with appropriately.
Right.
And I think that's a real...
An actual statement.
I think we need a statement, and that is an objective somewhere. The other one I wanted to suggest was something to do, and it may not be a objective level, but it needs to be in here somewhere, is a discussion citywide of ethics and leadership, with the idea that the employees of the city and the managers of it are leaders at all times, and they employ the highest levels of ethics.
And I would tell you again that I think that starts to cross into the administrative side of it, not on the, I don't disagree at all.
It's a weakness area that if council doesn't address it publicly at this time, we're missing an opportunity.
Okay. And I would tell you that if you miss that opportunity, then fire me and find some other manager, because that's not going to happen. I just want to make sure that what we're focusing your goals and objectives on are the community goals and objectives that you have as policymakers. Bruce, I agree 100% on both of those. I believe in both of those: high level of customer service when I went through the interview process, highest ethical and moral standards. I'm just saying that there's a difference between, the charter is very clear on administrative piece of it. So in your decisions as the policymaker of who you hire for your city attorney, for your municipal judge, and for your city manager, those are things that you would take into account there. If you want to, once you start to get into telling the staff how they should be, I think that's when you start to cross that line. Now, I'm happy to provide you with documentation that shows, I don't have it yet because I'm starting from here, but that in the expectations that I set for the organization, we can certainly demonstrate there that we hire with the highest level of integrity. We're in the process of updating our personnel policies. We'll have opening statements and that identify that.
Would you like an objective standard from us that would incorporate those things that you've just mentioned?
That like an objective.
That we hire, that we have top quality employees, that we hire the most qualified, that we have high expectations of performance.
Yeah, I'm not trying to be too bureaucratic in that. I'm just trying to keep this document focused on, I understand and I know where the issues are coming from, and we're trying to put all that behind us and raise the bar internally, and to the level that you feel that it is appropriate for the council to provide direction in that, or I think that's more appropriate in that particular example to turn to the manager and say, we have an expectation within your performance evaluation, as an example, that you are doing A, B, C, and D, and then if you've got a constituent that is asking you, what are you doing about this problem, you can say, we're holding our manager, or if it's an attorney thing, we're holding our direct staff accountable for whatever you've put in my performance evaluation. So,
Okay, we are going to need to wrap this up, so Peggy.
A real quick one, just for the record. I already talked to Michael about this, but there are some things we need to update absolutely in the charter, one of which does relate to something in this, and Michael and I talked about it, but so that however that might be, Michael would incorporate as needed in what he's doing.
Yep.
And I believe this kind of jogs my memory that part of the search was that Mercer would come back and do goals and objectives.
Michael's going to tell us
They-
about that, right?
Isn't that?
yes, and they have what I've proposed for the evaluation tool and some general statements about what the evaluation would be. But again, we were waiting for the goals and objectives from this so we could see
Okay.
about whether there was anything we should be incorporating from this. So he's really waiting for us to get through this conversation so we can incorporate some of that. But he has those documents, and we'll schedule it when we get through this, and we've got time for it. But
Okay, I
Yeah,
want to
they're
make
on it.
sure we know what's coming next, because, Michael, what are you going to bring back to us on these
So-
goals and objectives?
So I think we've got 4 hours scheduled for the 10th. And so I think what we'll do, we've got Tammy Tenoy coming, and Kirsten will give, and I'm guessing about 3 hours on all the legal, exciting stuff that they have to present. That'll leave us an hour.
3 hours. Really?
There'll be lots of coffee and caffeine.
I think Tammy thinks she can get through it faster, but you may have questions along the way. I think her presentation will probably be 2 hours, but I bet you'll have some questions.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so I think what we'll do is we'll get some more revision on this, flush out some of the goals and objective comments that you guys have made, try to bring back just that framework. We'll pull out the strategies just to keep you focused on on that high level, and maybe on the 10th, we can shoot for getting through just the goals and objectives, and then we've still got the breakfast discussion and start to talk about wireless. Then if the council's comfortable, we'll take a slight hiatus on that because Phil is going to be on vacation, and just to be inclusive on this, there's no huge time issue on this, that we'll pick it back up when he returns, which will throw a wrench into the way, Bruce, you described kind of the evolution of it. But I think we will have some, and I'll use the Northeast neighborhoods as an example. There's a lot of components in here that deal with the Northeast, and to Peggy's comment earlier, that all kind of intertwine with that. So staff is putting together, and we're blocking right now about 2 hours to give just an overall presentation on the Northeast. And so I'm hoping there's a couple of those that we can do that will really fill up that day just in terms of the education and information for the council. And then we'll continue this, then from that there'll be some specific pieces, but we'll continue just to drill down to Bruce's comment, and each time, and we'll bring study sessions to you, and we'll start to drill down different areas for it. So, and if everyone's comfortable, we'll be as flexible as possible.